Hello, I'm Eric Hanushek. I'm a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution of Stanford University. I'm an economist who has been studying education policy for a large number of years. And one of the elements of my study has gotten into the value of teachers and the importance of teachers. So I'm very pleased to be talking to the concerned educators of this country because, in simplest terms, I think that teachers are the answer to the future of the nation, frankly. Now that sounds a little bit like hyperbole, but I have been doing research on the long-run implications of education for the US economy. And the answer is quite frightening, actually. If we do not improve our schools, we're going to be in very bad competition with other nations of the world that in fact have been working hard to have high quality schools. And they're going to be our competitors. It's not just China, but it's a large number of other countries that are ahead of us. So today I would really like to give you an overview of what I think the research says about the quality of teachers, the value of high quality teachers, and some of the ideas that have been floated about reform and other things from the standpoint of an economist interested in education. I hope that that's what you're looking for today, and I will in fact go on for a while, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to interact. I started looking at education a long time ago when there was something called the Coleman Report that came out. The Coleman Report was a massive government study entitled Equality of Educational Opportunity. It was a study mandated by Congress in response to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This study, named after its principal author, James Coleman, who was a renowned sociologist, spent a lot of energy trying to look at the opportunities faced by people in different regions of the country, by different race and different backgrounds. Instead of just going around and measuring how many laboratories were available for students in the South versus the Northeast or what have you, which was the common way to think about equality of opportunity, Coleman and his team did something that was radical at the time. They actually tested some, I think it was 600,000 students in the country in 1965 in varying grades from 1st through 12th grade. And they had scores on reading and math and other tests. And then they related those to the factors that seemed to be determining the differences in achievement that were observed. The study came out with stunning conclusions. They said, well, really the thing that's most important in achievement is families. And friends are pretty important, but teachers in schools aren't very important. This caused quite a firestorm, and a lot of time was spent trying to figure out what the study had done and why it got to those conclusions. And that got me into education. I was writing a thesis at the time and went to a seminar that Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the senator and former Harvard professor, and Frederick Mosteller were running at Harvard. I got interested in it because I thought the results just couldn't make any sense. It couldn't be the fact that 12 years or more of schooling had no impact on students. That just didn't strike me as a true answer. So I started working on it, Over time, there were quibbles about how the Coleman people had done their report, but evidence accumulated that in fact differences among schools is very important. And that's the evidence that I've been pursuing for some time. What we did find in that was that many of the common measures of schools were not very predictive of the quality of schools. If you had just smaller classes, it didn't seem to matter. If you had just teachers with lots of experience, it didn't seem to matter. But early on, we discovered that, in fact, what really mattered was the quality of the teacher. It turns out that there's a big variation in how effective teachers are in the classroom. I don't think that's anything that surprises you folks. You see it all the time. That point has been, for me, one of the important issues to be considered as we try to improve our schools. I'll give you the conclusion and then I'll back up into how we get to that conclusion, and then we can talk about some reforms. My overall conclusion is that our best teachers are woefully underpaid. We should be paying good teachers and effective teachers a lot more, and we should keep them in the schools. At the same time, the part that sometimes upsets people is that our worst teachers, our least effective teachers, are way overpaid. Because I think, as all of you people know, in every school there's a very small number, 1 or 2 teachers who just simply shouldn't be in the school. They are not serving the population very well. What, in my opinion, we should be doing is worrying about how do we keep the most effective teachers in the classroom, and how do we help the least effective teachers to find a more suitable job for them, a more suitable job than being in the classroom. Now, behind all of this, for part of my work, has been a lot of statistical analysis. The statistical analysis generally looks at test scores of a variety of test scores that are available. The work that I'm talking about, for the most part, does not use test scores that were important for the performance ratings of teachers at all. They were just test scores that schools naturally gave along the way, and they didn't enter into any evaluation. So it wasn't the case, as far as we can tell, that teachers were working hard to sort of pump up just these test scores. They were just ancillary information that was collected along the way. We found some surprising things when we looked at differences in test scores. For me, the study and work that galvanized my interest in the question was a study that I did in Gary, Indiana, an old steel town near Chicago. There was a study that involved differences in achievement of all poor, all black students who were observed over time in the Gary schools. The startling result from that study was how much difference it made what classroom a student was assigned to. What we found is huge differences in how much a student gained, how much they learned over a year, dependent upon which classroom and which teacher they had. So the best teachers got a year and a half worth of achievement in a single academic year. So they were ahead in moving these kids ahead. The worst teachers, though, only got half a year of learning each academic year. What this implies is that depending on what classroom a student was assigned to, they could come out at the end a whole year's worth of learning different in terms of what they knew and their achievement. To me, this observation drives much of my thinking. And that's why I think we want to keep those year-and-a-half teachers in the classroom, but we don't want to keep the half-year teachers in the classroom. Now, along with those studies, these basically identify which teacher got these gains. People have looked in great detail at what it is that determines difference in performance of individual teachers. And this quest to identify the characteristics of good and bad teachers has largely been a failure. It turns out that there is no systematic difference between teachers with master's degrees and teachers without master's degrees. Caveat on that you identify with, there might well be a difference if you are a math teacher and have a master's in math, but if you are a primary school teacher and have a master's in education leadership, it has no impact on student performance. Additionally, what's been part of a lot of recent discussions, we find that experience past the first 2 or 3 years has no systematic influence on effectiveness. So the average 5th-year teacher in all the studies that I've seen is about equally as effective as the average 25th-year teacher. Now there's a lot of variation at every level of experience, and that's what's important. But that experience itself isn't important. So this suggests to me that our standard way of both identifying who are the good teachers and of paying teachers, the way that's embedded in many union contracts of the single salary schedule, doesn't make much sense. If we pay all teachers with a master's degree and 10 years experience the same, we are underpaying some of the effective teachers and we're overpaying some of the ineffective teachers. But in general, the salaries that we pay within a district have little to do with the effectiveness of teachers in the classroom. Now, let me follow on and pursue some of the larger issues for a minute that come out of these studies. There have now been a fairly large number of studies of what's called value added, you probably already recognize that try to look at how much learning gains are there in an individual classroom. Now we have to be very careful here, and let me describe in a little bit of detail value-added studies and learning gains, just so that there's no misunderstanding. What all of these studies do is look at the achievement of the student at the end of a year compared to where they started out. So that if you're in a highly disadvantaged school where most of the kids are behind grade level, all of these studies take that into account. And what they look at is whether, even if you take somebody who's 2 years behind grade level, did they get a year's worth of learning in a given year? Did they get more, or did they get less than a year's worth of learning? And the value-added studies are trying to isolate the impact of individual teachers and separate it from parents and friends and neighborhoods and all of the other things that we know are important. We know all those things are important, but we're trying to find out, well, what did the teacher add? Part of this has been controversial, in part because if you have a small number of students that you observe and estimate the value added of a teacher with, you will find that there's a lot of just measurement error. There's a lot of noise because on any given day, the kids that you have in your class and how they're feeling that day and how they do on an individual test can add a lot of error into what their achievement score says, and then that's reflected in the value added. So that the systems that really focus on value added, particularly when they get into the personnel area, always have a minimum number of kids that are involved and generally require that you observe value added over a couple of years with different students and with different measurement error. And when you do that, the answers give fairly consistent answers over time. The teachers that are rated at the top generally are rated at the top in the future, and teachers rated at the bottom are rated at the bottom in the future. Now, one of the other things that we found is that principals and supervisors are pretty good at identifying who are the effective and ineffective teachers. So these principals, in fact, if they're accurately rating teachers, do a pretty good job. Now, for me, there's always a lot of confusion in the middle. I don't think there's much confusion at the two ends of the distribution. I think that you people who are in the classroom and in schools all the time recognize who are the best teachers in your school, and without a lot of disagreement. You also consistently recognize who are the ineffective teachers, the ones who shouldn't be there. And to me, that's the information that we should be using in our personnel systems. We should, in fact, be paying attention to just the ends of the distribution and rewarding the good teachers, and not rewarding the poor teachers. Now, there's a related matter here that I think is relevant for all of you. And it has to do with the reason for your organization, the concerned educators. Most union contracts insist that there's no real evaluation of the teachers or evaluations that have an impact on the careers of teachers. And the general argument is, well, we would do better if we just paid teachers more. I think that the single salary schedule that doesn't pay attention to the effectiveness of teachers has worked to hold down salaries. Frankly, I think that salaries would naturally be a lot larger for teachers if, in fact, when the salaries were increased, the statement could be made, yes, and we're making sure that the largest salaries go to our best teachers, and that we're not overpaying our ineffective teachers. I think that that's had a tremendous impact on negotiations for salaries. And to me, loosening up on the evaluation of teachers and taking evaluations into account in personnel decisions would lead to much higher teacher salaries. I think a lot of people are sympathetic with that, but aren't willing to say, well, we have to pay the bad teacher more too. Now, all of these are starting to get into controversial areas. Before I get into those and the reform issues, let me give you just some of the economists' view on the effectiveness of teachers. One thing we can do, we know a lot about how different teachers are in our schools. These estimates of how different teachers are that come from value-added estimation, in fact, give quite consistent answers about what's the effectiveness of a top teacher, which I'd call, say, somebody in the 75th percentile of the distribution, and what's the effectiveness of a bottom teacher, somebody who's below the 25th percentile. If you take that information, you know about how achievement would change with an effective teacher. From other work, we know the value of achievement in the labor market. So when people are out in the labor market, it turns out that those that know more, those that have higher achievement tests, systematically earn more than those who have lower achievement tests. So this allows us to say, to get an actual monetary value on teacher effectiveness, because we can see how much does achievement go up with an effective teacher, and then we can see what's the value of that achievement as we look in the labor market. What we find are pretty astounding numbers. If I took a teacher at the 75th percentile of the achievement distribution, and that teacher had 30 students in her class, she would add to the future incomes of her students some $400,000 over their lifetime compared to just an average teacher. That is, each and every year, this person, the good teacher, adds $400,000 to the economy, to her classroom's future income. And that, by the way, I should say, is that some of it comes long into the future, after students have got to be my age, got to be older. But these numbers essentially weight things that are far into the distant future less than things currently. So these are numbers that you can compare to essentially writing a check for the future value. Now the other side of that is that a 25th percentile teacher subtracts $400,000 in future earnings from her class of 30. If you're at the 90th percentile or the 10th percentile, the numbers are really out of sight. These are annual differences. And by that I point out the fact that we're quite underpaying our best teachers for the work they're doing, and we should make some adjustments in that. Now, all of this comes back to sort of policy questions, and these are the questions that maybe some of you have thought about. I'm sure a lot of you have thought about them. How do we evaluate teachers, and how do we use that information? Now, nobody I know, nobody, believes that you should rate teachers entirely on their value-added scores or the individual test of their students. The tests are just simply too narrow, and they don't reflect the full impact of teachers. Therefore, almost all people believe that heavy weight should be given to either supervisor ratings or ratings of professional evaluators, or in my ideal system, we would have other teachers also evaluating the quality of teachers in the school. This rating information, in my opinion, should be added to value-added scores whenever they're available. Now, the debate nationally has been about should we use test scores or not. It turns out that very few teachers have students who have been tested enough to provide the information to be used in value-added scores. Currently, we have testing in grades 3 through 8 and one of the high school grades in math and reading. Well, that means there are a lot of teachers that are teaching in classes that don't have regular testing involved. In Washington, D.C., where they use a system of evaluation that includes test scores and value-added measures, only 20% of the teachers have a value-added score. For those 20%, currently about 2/3 of their rating comes from outside evaluations, and only 1/3 comes from the test scores. But for the other 80%, there are no test scores available, and all of the information comes from the evaluations of outside raters. Now, how we do that is still something that we're struggling with in terms of policy and in terms of debates. Washington, D.C. actually hires professional evaluators who come into classrooms multiple times during the year have feedback for the teachers and try to get a reliable and useful evaluation of teachers. More useful than the standard where everybody is good and it doesn't give you any feedback. Washington, D.C. has applied this system with some controversy, of course. There was a huge battle between Michelle Rhee, the chancellor of the system when it was put into place, and the head of the AFT, who didn't want evaluations to be done. I think that Washington, D.C. is beyond that, and a number of other systems are moving in that direction. One system is Dallas, Texas, where after a long study, they've developed a elaborate system for evaluating principals first, and this year, for the first time, evaluating teachers, in which there is a scoring rubric based upon their performance and a way of adding together all the different kinds of information they have, coming up with an overall score and rating of teachers, and then using that information for their pay and retention decisions. Now, we don't know how that system works yet. In Washington, D.C., it looks like the system is having positive impacts on student performance. But these are things that are still they're in process, but I think that they are the future that we want to have. So there's an overview of what I think we know about teacher quality, what determines it. As I say, we've been unsuccessful at identifying characteristics of teachers that count, but I think we're pretty successful at being able to identify which specific teachers do well and which don't. We're a little bit in the middle of a debate, sometimes very contentious debate, about how to evaluate teachers and what to do with evaluation information. Now, some of the bigger policy issues is, should the federal government be involved? Probably not. The federal government is not in a position to identify what's going on in individual schools. In fact, I think that this is a matter of local decision-making, and it ought to be included in local contract negotiations and discussions. How we get to that point is another matter because of the long history, particularly of union negotiations that resist any individual evaluation of teachers. States should be involved, and we're right today having debates about accountability systems, about No Child Left Behind, and what should follow on. I'll quickly give you my views on this. I think the evidence suggests that, in fact, No Child Left Behind has had a positive impact on student achievement, not overwhelming, but positive, and it's been important. It's been important because we have started to recognize where achievement is good and where it is not so good. This is important. So from my standpoint, continuing regular annual testing is extraordinarily important. Now, the debates are how do we use that? And there are open questions that all of you recognize, but I think that's the answer. For the US, we rank somewhere around 30th in the world in terms of math achievement for 15-year-olds. There are a set of international tests that assess the achievement of 15-year-olds around the world. They're called the PISA tests that you've probably heard of. There's another set called TIMSS. These tests are standardized tests that are quite high quality. But more than that, these tests relate directly to the economic future of our country. We have found that the economic growth of individual countries is closely related to the student performance on these achievement tests. Simply put, it says something that I'm sure all you believe. The quality of our future and of our economy is highly dependent on the skills of our people. It is now the time that we have to take this seriously and stop being so complacent. The US has not done well on these tests, and it's important. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other things that are important. In fact, we have a very good economic system in the US that's much better than that in almost all other countries of the world, and that's helped our economy to be strong. But we cannot rely on that to carry us into the future, because other countries are in fact improving their economy, but doing it with a more skilled population, so that our traditional strength as leaders in technology and in innovation, which is, in my opinion, largely come from an economic system that rewards innovation and rewards the people in Silicon Valley, where I'm sitting today, this won't hold for the future in the sense that other countries also reward skills and creativity, and we'll see other countries leading if we don't take this opportunity to improve our schools. So there's my message. I view it as a positive message for teachers. I think that it highlights the important role. It's not meant to blame teachers, because we know lots of other things affect achievement. We know parents are extraordinarily important. We know other friends and peers are important. It's just that we don't know how to have public policies that affect what goes on in the family very well. We do have public policies that affect how good our teachers are, how well they're rewarded, and that's where we should be spending our time. And I thank you. I hope that this provokes a little discussion within your group, and I'd be happy to continue the discussion with you people. Thank you.